All right. Sorry, y'all. We went a little long in that previous session and cut into Elizabeth's presentation. Elizabeth is a recognized environmental expert with more than 10 years of experience in air quality permitting and compliance, greenhouse gas quantification, and climate change impacts. She specializes in assisting clients with GHG inventories and target setting, oil and gas methane partnership implementation, emissions reporting, state and federal air permitting, and environmental compliance auditing and support. She has a passion for co-creating fit-for-purpose solutions for clients and has managed complex projects for clients in numerous industries, including oil and gas, electric power generation, technology and data centers, and chemical manufacturing. She also has a significant experience developing and presenting custom classroom trainings on topics including GHG quantification and reporting, new source performance standards, subpart Quad A compliance, oil and gas permitting and compliance, and Texas environmental regulations. So Elizabeth, we're looking forward to the presentation. Y'all, it's really hot in here. It's been hot since 8 o'clock this morning when I got here. So I may, if I start to prune up like a raisin, it's because I'm dehydrated. If I pass out, someone, just let Elizabeth keep going, and we'll keep moving through this. We'll actually open that door. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, appreciate that.
Great, thank you.
Too much of a distraction, I'll close it back.
Yeah, no worries, and feel free to lose your suit jacket. I might do the same. Thank you all for coming this afternoon. Thank you for the introduction, Randy. As Randy mentioned, I am a managing consultant with Montrose Environmental, focusing on climate change and sustainability. Briefly, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about who Montrose is, use that to kind of set the stage for what we're going to talk about today, which is differentiated natural gas, and how you can apply technology to improve the transparency and the accuracy of your emissions. So first, Montrose Environmental is an environmental services firm. We've got about 2,800 employees now with 70 plus offices located across the United States, Canada, and Australia. That's a map that may or may not be quite accurate because we're growing all the time, but we're located lots of places. That's really the takeaway with our headquarters in Little Rock, Arkansas. Montrose got its start, and I think it's really well known for our measurement experts, and they're great. I love them. But I think it's also important to recognize that we have a lot more going on now. We've got folks who can help with PFAS water remediation. We've got lab services. We've got emerging technologies. We've got permitting and compliance. And the list goes on and on. So basically, if you've got an environmental question, chances are we've got an expert who's happy to talk to you about it. Today, I'm going to talk to you specifically about a couple of parts of this. One is the advisory services team, which is the one that I'm part of, and our work, our measurement and analysis team, to offer solutions in the oil and gas space for measuring and quantifying your greenhouse gas emissions. So here's a rundown of what we're going to talk about today. We're going to start by talking briefly about climate change and the oil and gas industry and our place in that space. Moving on, we're going to talk about differentiated natural gas, what it is, why it matters, and how you can claim that you have it. Next, we're going to talk specifically about technologies that you can leverage to improve the accuracy of emissions quantifications from oil and gas operations. And then finally, I'm going to wrap up with a case study talking about a client that we've been working with extensively on their OGMP 2.0 implementation and kickoff and their measurement campaigns. Sorry. So setting the stage, climate change in the oil and gas industry. Methane gets a lot of attention. According to recent estimates, we can't cap out a 1.5 degree Celsius base temperature increase without a very significant decline in methane emissions. Current estimates around 37%. Methane has a high global warming potential, which is 25 to 28-ish times higher than carbon dioxide. Because of that, it's thought that methane is responsible for about 30% of observed global warming to date. Methane is also the primary component of natural gas. Therefore, if you look at a breakdown of reported methane emissions in 2021, the energy sector is a very large percentage, about 40. What's interesting is because methane is natural gas, it is the product, it's thought that you can avoid about 70% of current oil and gas methane emissions with technology that exists today. And not because you're recovering product, that you could probably avoid about 45% of that number at no additional cost to you. Also interesting about methane emissions from the oil and gas industry is that, according to some estimates, actual emissions may be up to 70% higher than what's actually been reported. That's from information from flyovers and independent studies. What drives that? Incomplete information. If you don't have measurements, if you don't have real data, how do you know? How do you know what you're emitting without measurements? And there's also a statement that ultra emitters are about 12% of the methane puzzle. Okay, so all that together, what are the takeaways? One, methane emissions from oil and gas are under extreme scrutiny. We know that, we hear that, we see that every day. Methane is natural gas, energy sector results in methane emissions. Two, methane emissions reported from the oil and gas industry are incorrect. The status quo depended on emission factors. We know now that those emission factors are correct. So what do? We hear questions every day from the people saying, okay, I hear this, I know this, but now what? How do I accurately estimate the emissions from my processes? But then what do I do next? I know what I'm emitting. And there's a lot of options. How do I know what's best for me? And these are, like I said, questions that we hear every day. They're real, they're hard, but they're also interesting. They offer us incredible opportunity to learn more, to get creative, to apply technology, and to try to make a change. That brings me to differentiated natural gas. So what is differentiated? It's actually pretty simple in terms of a definition. It's three things. The fossil fuel-based gas, natural gas. It is from production where methane emissions have been quantified, and there's been an effort to mitigate or reduce those levels. And then importantly, third part of the puzzle of the definition is differentiated natural gas, is that these estimates and this mitigation strategy has gone through a third party group. Those together make differentiated natural gas. Differentiated natural gas, like we were just talking about, came about because there's an energy transition driving the divestment of oil and gas. There's worry that a leaky value chain is going to negate the impacts of switching to natural. And because there's so much scrutiny in the oil and gas space on greenhouse gas emissions, the claim of greenwashing is very prevalent. So that third statement comes in and becomes very important. You're working together to come up with a strategy that is transparent, that is defensible when you're putting together your methane estimates. Just as a little bit of background here, you might also hear differentiated natural gas referred to as responsibly sourced gas, certified gas, or low carbon intensity gas. Renewable natural gas, or RNG, is completely different. That's from like renewable biological sources. Just put that one in a different bucket. There are benefits to pursuing differentiated natural gas. I kind of separated these into two buckets because often people will gravitate towards one reason or the other, and they're both completely valid. The first are the business reasons. Preventing loss of methane to atmosphere keeps more product in your pit. You're selling more, you're increasing your profit, it makes financial sense. There's also a potential for a price premium. if you've got differentiated natural gas. If consumers are interested in that label and knowing that they're doing some part to reduce climate impact, they're often willing to pay a little bit more for it. It may also prepare companies for proposed legislation and emission taxes that could be coming down the pipe. It protects against risky assets in the energy transition. We're seeing more and more focus from an investment perspective on ESG, carbon footprint. And if you understand where your emissions are, you can protect yourself financially. And then I also put in this business bucket that there are a lot of options within the differentiated natural gas program. When you have options and you don't have something that's very prescriptive, you have more power to choose what fits for you and your operations. You're not necessarily having to have huge impacts to your business. From a climate perspective, differentiated natural gas programs allow operators to reduce their climate impacts through methane measurement and mitigation. And because they're very data driven, you're ending up with more transparent and accurate accounting, which allows you to prioritize your projects so that you're making the biggest real life impact. The differentiated natural gas in the United States especially is voluntary. It's voluntary, but it's gaining a lot of popularity. Because it's voluntary, not regulatory driven, we're seeing a lot of options in that space right now, right? Lots of people are coming forth with ideas on how to address this, how to change this. And there's a terminology that's important to understand. The frameworks for differentiated natural gas really fall into three buckets or categories. The first are certifications. These are the most formal programs. They're going to hold participants to very binding prescriptive standards, and they require an explicit declaration of achievement by an administrating organization. These are going to be generally considered your more rigorous, your more difficult certifications to attain. Things like MIQ. Just an aside, I did not list every single framework on this slide that exists. There's about 1 million, so I just called out a few of the big names here. Commitments are a little bit more forward-looking in that participants are pledging to a goal that they're trying to achieve, and they are committing to steps to try to achieve that goal. But often getting any sort of achievement or designation under a commitment doesn't require that you actually meet the goal. Pledging to try. These are things like One Future, the EPA Methane Challenge, and OGMP 2.0. And then there are guidelines. Guidelines are not really something where you're going to get like a certification or a stamp of approval from, but instead these are guidance documents that might help you as you're putting together your calculations, as you're building your program. You can look to guidance to help you understand what your options are for putting together calculations. So something like a guideline would be the Natural Gas Sustainability Initiative, NGSI. You see a lot of folks who are calculating their methane intensity or their carbon intensity using NGSI guidelines. All right. So the point of this slide that I want you to take away, besides understanding the difference between the certification and the commitment and so on and so forth, is that it's a big world. There's lots of options. There's lots of things you can pursue, and none of them is going to be the best fit for everyone. And so it's important to make yourself aware of what's out there, understand the differences, and if required, talk to someone who can help you think about what's going to be the best fit for you, because it's going to have implications, whichever path you choose. All right. So most of those frameworks are going to require a first step of knowing where you are, right? I'm sure if you've gone to any talks today, you've heard some variation on the theme of you can't mitigate what you don't. I'm going to say the same thing today. It's important to know where you're starting to make goals where you're ending up. And so I want to talk to you about how you can apply technology to refine your emission quantifications within oil and gas. Accurate measurements are the first step towards putting together that initial inventory. Once you have that initial inventory, you're going to know where your biggest potential for reductions and improvement might exist. All right, so why should we measure? If you look back at historical oil and gas reporting, what you see looking at EPA mandatory reporting rule subpart W, there's a lot of relying on generic emission factors, a scuff per minute per unit emission factor for something. We're automatically assuming that it's going to operate continuously or at full load for 87, 60 hours per year. And you end up at a number that is maybe conservative, maybe not, maybe underestimating, maybe not. But you get a number, but it's not accurate. It's not tied to anything about your operation. If instead you choose to explore both proven and emerging technologies, you can deploy measurement campaigns at your sites, collect data from your equipment based on your processes, and develop a database of emission factors that you can then leverage and apply across your organization to end up at an emissions estimate that is transparent. You can publish your methodologies for your measurements, for your sampling, for your assumptions, and should also be more accurate because it's based on your operations. And so I argue firmly that this is where we want to end up. That if you're starting a sustainability journey, if you're anywhere on this path, you need to measure what you're doing to figure out where you're going. Within the oil and gas world, basically see 4 types of emission sources where folks are focusing on bottom-up or emission source specific measurement. Those categories are fugitives. So those are unintentional leaks from things like your piping components, your valves, your flanges, your connectors, stuff like that. You see emissions from vents, things like your glycol dehydrates, your pneumatic devices also qualify as vents. Methane slip emissions from your combustion sources, like your compressors or your turbines, your engines. And then flares, your control devices, understanding what the greenhouse gas impact is of those sources. Altogether, you can also try to get an idea of what your site as a whole is emitting through measurement of site-wide emissions through fence line aerial sort of measurement that you can then use to do what we call site-wide reconciliation, basically see if your site-wide numbers match the sum of your and really drive at that approach to understand where you are today. On the right-hand side here, how do you measure? And I think I put 10 circles there, and there's a lot more than that. I tell my kids all the time that we live in the future. It's a really exciting time right now. Technology is changing, and it's changing fast. What we have today is not the same as yesterday or what we're going to have. And so there are so many technologies out there that you can apply to your site to try to get an idea of what's happening at these sources, what's happening at your site side-wide. Where are you? So you can decide where you're going. This is also really important. One thing that I love about the team that I work on is that we're working with the guys who are taking the measurements in the field, and we're figuring out how to take that data and how to leverage it. How do we use it? How do we interpret it? We work with them to figure out the bounds of our measurement campaign. What sources are we going to test? How many of them? What's a significantly or a statistically defensible way to put together a testing strategy to ensure that we're testing and getting data on a representative number of sources? Once that testing has occurred, we develop emission factors based on the data that's collected in the field and field data, importantly, that can be collected from the site so that they can use those emission factors moving forward. Can we tie an emission factor to fuel flow, to something else tangible, so we can try to use that factor in a way that is accurate and defensible? And then from there, once you have your emission factors, you need to apply them. You need to update your calculation tools, integrate them into your platforms so that you can leverage your measurements across your organization and end up at an emissions estimate that is accurate. All right, so these next slides, I think I'm going to fly through. I'm not intending to spend a lot of time on, but I wanted to give you just a small taste of some of the technology that exists and which bin you might put it into for sources that you could use it to measure. There are measurement experts in the room. If you have questions, you can talk to them. I'm just going to do a high-level rundown. Starting with fugitives and event emission, fugitives and event emission detection technology. This is by and large the most numerous kind of emission source that you're going to have at an oil and gas site, right? You're going to have thousands of piping components, so on and so forth. So the most efficient way to get at this is really using a two-step system, doing first a screen to identify whether emissions exist from a particular component or particular source at all, using a technology like optical gas imaging with your FLIR, your op-val, or potentially using a simple handheld gas monitor or something like Snoop if you're just trying to track down a leak that you hear. Once you that the emission point does exist, it's important to quantify it. If you're going to use these data points to update your calculations, you need a number. Ways that you can get a number are summarized on this slide. Far and away, I think the most common is the high flow sampler. That one, if you want to hold one. But we're also seeing a few clients who are trying to leverage the quantitative OGI technology as well. And then there's some other proven technology on this slide that could also apply to your specific operations. There's a suite of available emission measurement technology. If you've got combustion sources, you're going to need to look at stack testing. A term that we're hearing a lot and that people are really trying to get a handle on is methane slip. That is uncombusted methane that's coming from your stack of a combustion device. The best way, the most reliable way that people are getting at that number, at least as a direct measurement, is going to be through FTIR stack testing, which is the technology that was in here right before I finished up. It's important to note that for me, at least what I'm seeing is this methane slip question is getting a lot of questions about, is there something we can do besides FTIR? Is there a different way to apply a different technology? And so that's something that we have been working on, but the most common is FTIR. Flares. We've got a strong partnership with Providence Photonics, who's also here at this conference, where we've been working with our clients to deploy their Mantis technology to get a quantitative measurement of how efficient the combustion is within their flare, to get an actual understanding of the DRE, the destruction efficiency of the flare. The standard in the industry is to assume 98% flat. We're seeing anything from 92% to 99%. And with the flow rates that are set to a flare, that can make a world of difference in your actual greenhouse gas quantification. So this is important, and I think it's one of my kind of favorite ones to learn a little bit more about and to see videos of it in action. All right, so those are level measurements. I mentioned on that initial slide into this section that there's top-down and bottom-up measurements or source-specific versus site-wide. A lot of the times, as folks are feeling like they have a handle on their source-specific calculations, they're moving into site-wide measurements that inform this reconciliation, right? To true up their emissions estimates and to argue that they got it right. One way that you can start to collect data on site-wide measurements is using fixed figures. If you want to say an aside, you can also use this to get hyperlocal information if you position it correctly by the exact right source or whatever. But within my world, I'm seeing it more from a site-wide perspective. And these are technologies that deploy at your fence line, essentially, to measure your site-wide. There are a lot of different options for technologies, the sensors inside, how they're powered, how they communicate with your systems, and so on and so forth. Some of the emerging technologies are really cool. The idea of using a drone or a satellite or a van or a laser set up on your perimeters, I think it's fascinating. And the technologies exist. There are companies both within partners to Montrose, people within Montrose who can speak at length of who we're working with, who's doing this. But it's another option that you can deploy to start to get an idea of what your site-wide emissions look like. Here's one slide on satellite and airframe services as well. What I want the takeaway for this to be, for this section, is an understanding that the world is big. Nothing is going to work for every site. There's not something we can point to and say, everybody should do this. And even within one operator, you can't say that. You can't say this is going to work. You can't deploy drones everywhere in the world. It's not safe. You can't have fence lane monitors if environmental conditions aren't amenable to it. So you need to be flexible. You need to stay aware of what's out there and understand pros, the cons, technology before choosing what you proceed with. But the common goal here is all the same. It's all to understand where you are now so you can prioritize where you're going. I'm going to finish up by talking about one important, one really exciting project that we've been working on for the last 9 to 12 months, which is assisting a multinational oil and gas operator with their OGMP 2.0 measurement campaigns and implementation. Briefly, OGMP 2.0 is a differentiated natural gas commitment. To join OGMP 2.0, there's not any sort of fee. What you do is you sign a memorandum of understanding with the United Nations Environment Program committing to take part in this program. You commit to a goal for achieving a industry-driven methane intensity, and you commit to deploying accurate and transparent measurement technologies to support your assertion that you're moving towards that goal. This program is actually pretty big. It includes 35% of the global oil and gas production now, 70% of the LNG flows, 25% of global natural gas transmission and distribution pipelines, and then 10% of global storage strategy. There's obviously room to grow and to see this continue to keep moving forward. But a lot of the really big oil and gas players have committed to the program. The way that this is structured is that OGMP has 5 different reporting levels, depending on the specificity of the emission calculations that you are using to develop your portfolio methane emission estimates. Going from 1 to 5, or 1 to 4, really, they're moving from the most generic site-wide assumptions into specific emission source level emission factors. And then level 5 is that site level reconciliation that I described previously. This level 4 is where we're seeing a lot of people trying to get right. In OGMP 2.0, what you do is you put together a baseline emissions inventory of where your emissions are now, and then you commit to achieving level 4 quantification on those emission sources that are considered to be material or make up about 95% of your footprint. To achieve this level 4 level, you are basically sampling what they have defined as a statistically number of your sources in your operating scenarios, and then deploying those measurement results to update your emissions inventory calculations. In order to achieve the OGMP gold standard, you have 3 years after you've made that initial pledge. You basically are awarded the gold standard every year. You can lose it. The first year that you're in the program, you can get the gold standard if you put together an implementation plan that outlines a credible strategy for achieving level 4, level 5. And throughout your participation in the program, you should be achieving that level of measurement, that level of measurement accuracy. So really your gold standard designation tied to how well you're measuring and how well you're planning to continue measuring in the future. What I think is exciting about OGMP 2.0 is that it is transparent. It requires you to disclose how you're measuring your assumptions and like for like emission factor development. It goes through a third-party review so that it can assure your investors or your stakeholders that what you're doing is accurate. It also fosters collaboration within the industry. The member companies that are part of OGMP 2.0 are giving feedback on the technical guidance. They're dictating where the program goes so that it stays relevant and achievable to the people who actually know how to run the operations. They also get together every year. It was last week. The member companies got together for a conference in Amsterdam. And so it really is a community of folks who are working together to try to understand and mitigate methane emissions while also understanding the role that oil and gas has to play in fueling everything. Okay, so another thing that I think is really great about OGMP is that it is not prescriptive in your technology. So this operator that we've been working on or working with, we have been working with them in 5 countries, I think. And each country has been a little bit different in terms of our measurement strategies, the technologies that we've been deploying. By and large, the sources that we've been testing are the same. We're doing fugitive campaigns and stack campaigns and flare campaigns. Depending on what their emissions footprint looks like, materiality is dictating which sources will. The operations are dictating, do we need to do a turbine stack test in 2 or 3 loads or just that one? How are they actually running their operation? How do we need to impact or adjust our sampling strategy if this is an offshore operation versus an onshore operation? What are technologies that we can explore if their combustion stacks aren't all outfitted for stack testing? You know, these are just some of the questions that we've worked with this operator to address. I guess another interesting question that we've been working with this operator on is how to quantify and get an actual number for emissions from their pneumatics and from their fusion components, because they had purchased 10 QOGIs, and now we're trying to understand how did the head-to-head comparisons of QOGI compare to high flow, and might there be a situation where you can use one technology versus the other? It's been a really great project where we've been able to work directly with the measurement teams within Montrose to get the boots on the ground support for taking the measurements. But then we've also got our team that's largely, remote data driven, who's figuring out the strategy, the analysis, the interpretation of that data, updating the implementation plans, training the personnel on what it means. Like, we're doing it all, and it's been very cool. It's been very cool to see how it changes from this country to this country, from this site to this site. My last slide, which I think is good. So we're right at time. But my last takeaway point here is that I know that I've focused a lot on emissions quantification and understanding baseline emissions and measurement technologies. But that's not all it is. There's a lot more components to having a successful OGMP or any other sustainability program within your organization. And these are just a few of the things that you can expect to need to do if you're going down this path. You're going to need to have an implementation plan clearly outlining what is your strategy, how does it work. You're going to need to make sure that your calculations are in good shape and that you understand what your harvest rates are. You're going to need to make sure that your field operators know what data they need to collecting so that you can update your calculations when you have your measurement numbers. There's a lot that comes together into a successful sustainability program. But that foundation, that first step is understanding where you are. And I firmly believe that the technology exists to answer that question.
I have a question for you. So
Sure.
I'm a little bit confused with the differentiated natural gas and a responsible source gas. So for example, if you are a natural gas producer in California subject to CARB, I think that will automatically make you a differentiated natural gas, right? But I thought a responsibly sourced gas needs a certification. But like Project Canary or something like that.
So Project Canary is one certification within the differentiated natural gas world. The definition of differentiated natural gas, I do think is a little bit nebulous and a little bit open to interpretation right now. Based on my understanding, it really is those three things, just the independent certification of some sort, along with the methane quantification and mitigation efforts. I do know that California's also got additional designations and terminology that might be slightly different and more nuanced there than the national. I'm happy to look into it more. Thank you. You're welcome. Yes.
Do you know if EPA is looking at providing any flexibility for companies that have better data or better emission factors to not be stuck using like 13 SCF per hour for emission insurance?
So that is the $1 million question. The new subpart W text isn't out yet. You know, if you look at the public comments that were submitted on that rule, a lot of them go there because it's really frustrating to have better data and be in violation of federal law. Nobody likes that. What we've been encouraging our customers to do is basically have two numbers, put together a sustainability report, say, this is what we reported under sub W. This is what we're reporting in our sustainability report, and this is why we feel like we're accurate. But clearly acknowledging the difference and just addressing it straight up. Thank you. You're welcome.
Yeah, that creates issues, right? Because so far W data is obtainable and reviewed, so they're gonna say, this is what you're reporting, you say this. I mean, public's probably gonna decide not on that regard to public image. So.
I think if there's you get different numbers in other places too. If you're in Colorado, you're seeing hard rules, guidelines, and sub W report under IPCC got different numbers yet. So I mean, I do think that as hopefully as the public gets more educated, they'll get a little seeing different numbers until the guidance, the guidelines, and new states come together to one solution. We're not there yet.
We have time for one more question.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks a lot.